I'll be talking today about Chapter 1 on dueling from the book by Kwame Anthony Appiah called The Honor Code. All human cultures developed adjudication systems to determine guilt or to resolve personal injuries. The earliest form was the blood feud, lex talionis, which is an eye for an eye. When Christianity emerged as a dominant form, the blood code was replaced by the ordeal, a physical test of water, hot iron, fire, eventually combat. And combat was to the death. That's the real beginning of the duel. The belief was that the result would be the judgment of God. Basically, the duel became a form of common legal procedure that was governed by an elaborate set of rituals, rules, religious practices. Ultimately, by the 14th century, the duel was being replaced by another religious form, which was confession. And confession was elicited by torture. So the duel reemerges in the 16th century as solely a question of honor. It's a male code based on the code DUEL with all these rules about who can challenge whom and where the duel would be held and witnesses and the whole thing. By the early 19th century, the duel had largely been outlawed throughout Europe and the United States. But when anything is outlawed, it still persists in certain places. The circumstances that led to the end of the dueling culture, in my assessment, were four. The first one was the rise of the nation state, which assumed a monopoly of legitimate force within the kingdom that adopted a rationalistic arrangement of legal process that was satisfactory for resolving disputes. The second circumstance was the evolution of a comprehensive legal structure that defined crime specifically and especially allowed adjudication of disputes over land and property. The third circumstance was the decline of the economic and political power of the aristocracy. They were replaced by the middle class, the commercial middle class, and ultimately that class came to power and dominance during the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. The fourth was what Appiah identifies as a moral revolution. I would term it as behavioral opposition to the duel grounded in moral principles. Appiah's thesis on the moral revolution, I find it a little questionable. The first reason is because I think that the moral revolution or a moral basis was a necessary but not sufficient cause of the end of the duel. What was more likely involved was a more complicated process, a process of gradual changing ethical standards that is the individual code of behavior as defined by the group, as applied to morals and legal ethics. They led to the end of dueling rather than a sudden moral revolution. It was changing economic, social, and cultural factors. The other thing that I had a bit of a problem with Appiah is his historical model. He seems to take a Whig historical model, which implies that history is the process of moving from savagery and ignorance to civilization, rationality, and morality. I have a problem with that because I don't think that's the way history works. The evolution is not so much a moral issue that leads to progress as the whole infrastructure changes and makes it possible then for moral issues to be applied.